you again for being here today, and thank you all for your service to our country and our community. And I did notice, Dale, you missed one very important distinguished veteran in the crowd, and that's Judge Kerry Nelson, former Navy officer over there. And appreciate your service, Judge Nelson. Now, I've got a few remarks prepared, and I've got notes here, and I'm not sure with the sunlight the way it is if I'm going to be able to see all my notes. So if I just start wondering and sound like a preacher lost on Sunday morning, you'll know why. I will have lost my notes. To let you know a little bit about where I come from and how I come to you today, I would just like to share with you, of course, I was in the United States Air Force, active duty. I joined the Air Force in August 2001, and I'd been on my first duty assignment for about 4 days when we were attacked on September 11th. And I remember that day distinctly because I was getting my in-process brief at Shaw Air Force Base, and a guy comes in the door and he says, we're at Force Protection Condition Delta, and everybody needs to report to your workstation and wait for your next orders. And I was irritated because I thought I had just come from a training base. I knew he was supposed to say exercise, exercise, exercise after that, but he didn't say it. And it was the beginning of a new time for all of us, but that's how I got my introduction to the Air Force. I spent 4 years in active duty and then left active duty and joined the Reserve, and now I've been in the National Guard for about a year, in the Air National Guard. And so service is important to me. Military service is important to me. Not because I tripped on it one day, but because it was ingrained in me, as with many of you. My father, who's here this morning over next to Chief Culpepper, Ken Coomer, is a Marine, and his decision to join the Marine Corps was influenced greatly by somebody he never met. His uncle, who was my great uncle, was Amos Coomer, who died at the age of 19 on Guadalcanal as a United States Marine. I tell you that so you can understand the kind of legacy that leads us all to our service. Just like it led you, it led me. And not just me, but I also have two younger brothers, both of whom are Army combat veterans, both of whom served in Iraq and Korea. And we have a proud heritage of service. So when I come here today to talk to you about remembering those who've fallen, it's not a foreign concept to me. And it's something that I hold dear, and I want you to know as we start this talk, that's where I come from today. If you ask soldiers who've been in combat why they kept fighting in the face of adversity, in the face of difficulty, you're going to get a wide array of answers. You might get someone who'll tell you it was because they were afraid of being captured, or maybe it was because they just wanted to make sure the guys they were with were safe longer, or maybe it was some high noble idea of preserving their country, or preserving their way of life, or preserving their own family. But whether the reason was noble or just basic survival instinct, we have an obligation and a duty to remember and to honor those who've fallen in service to us. And Memorial Day is not like Veterans Day, and it's not like the 4th of July. Today is not a celebration of our veterans and a celebration of our liberties as much as it is a day of somber remembrance for those who've fallen. So as we take time to reflect on heroes that we know of, people whose stories we've heard, it's also important for us to remember those fallen heroes whose stories we're never going to hear. People whose names we're not going to read on some emblazoned wall, or whose names we're not going to see in some memorial hall, because their final act of heroism was taken in private. It was taken with a group of men or women who joined them in their ultimate sacrifice. People whose names we don't know because there's nobody left to tell their story. But they were just as important to our story of freedom. Please remember them and their families as you remember those who we know and can talk about as heroes today. Fortunately, some heroes do leave a legacy we can read about and know about. One such hero was Leslie Sabo Jr. Leslie Sabo Jr. was born in 1948 in Austria. His parents had been upper-class professionals in pre-World War II Austria and Hungary. Leslie and his family moved to the United States when he was just 2 years old because his parents recognized that Soviet communism was going to be the form of government for a long time in Eastern Europe. They fled Europe, coming to the United States. Arriving in the United States, Leslie Sabo Sr., his father, who had been an attorney, decided to go back to school and became an engineer. Worked in the United States booming engineering industry and settled his family in Elwood City, Pennsylvania. That's where the Sabo boys, Leslie Sabo Jr. and his brother, grew up. He finished high school, and throughout his childhood, Leslie's father instilled in him two important character traits. One was self-discipline, and the other was patriotism. Now, I'll pause here on patriotism for a minute because Leslie Sabo Sr. instilled a patriotism that was not about a loyalty to a place or a homeland like Austria. It was not to an ideology like communism, but his patriotism was for the freedom that he and his family had run to when they escaped Soviet communism in Hungary. In fact, unlike many of his contemporaries when Leslie Sabo Jr. was a teenager in the 1960s, he actually supported the concept of the war in Vietnam because he understood, uniquely perhaps, what we were fighting for in Vietnam was to stop the spread of communism that his family had experienced in Eastern Europe. He understood that communism couldn't be allowed to spread to the utter ends of Asia. Leslie went to college, but before he finished college, he left college and was drafted into service. He embraced his duty wholeheartedly, ignoring calls from his wife and others to just leave and avoid the draft. Leslie Sabo Jr. was serving as a rifleman in Company B, 3rd Battalion, 506th Infantry, 101st Airborne Division in Saigon, Cambodia on May 10, 1970. On that day, Specialist 4 Sabo and his platoon were conducting a reconnaissance patrol when they were ambushed from all sides by a large enemy force. Without hesitation, Specialist 4 Sabo charged an enemy position, killing several enemy soldiers. Immediately thereafter, he assaulted an enemy flanking force, successfully drawing their fire from friendly soldiers and ultimately forcing the enemy to retreat. In order to resupply ammunition, he sprinted across an open field to a wounded comrade. As he began to reload, an enemy grenade landed nearby. Specialist 4 Sabo picked it up, threw it away, and shielded his comrade with his own body, thus absorbing the burn of the blast and saving his comrade's life. Seriously wounded by the blast, Specialist 4 Sabo nonetheless retained the initiative and then single-handedly charged an enemy bunker that had inflicted severe damage on the platoon, receiving several serious wounds from automatic weapons fire in the process. Now mortally injured, he crawled toward the enemy emplacement and, when in position, threw a grenade into the bunker. The resulting explosion silenced the enemy fire, but also ended Specialist 4 Sabo's life. His indomitable courage and complete disregard for his own safety saved the lives of many of his platoon members. For his action, Leslie Sabo Jr. was posthumously promoted to the rank of sergeant, and in 2012 he was awarded the Congressional Medal of Honor for his actions on May 10, 1970, some 42 years earlier. The reason I wanted to tell you Leslie Sabo Jr.'s story in particular is because of the unique place he found himself as an immigrant in this country. If you take time to look at some of the recipients of the Congressional Medal of Honor, you'll realize in reading their stories, many of them, a significant percentage of them, were immigrants to this country, born in other countries, coming to the United States for the promise and the hope of freedom. In the instance of the Sabo family, they maintained their proud heritage, learning their own family history and even speaking their native language at home. However, the Sabo family also knew the gift of freedom they were given was of great value, not to be taken lightly. They understood the privilege of freedom brought with it a responsibility of duty. And that understanding is not unique to the Sabo family. If you look at a list of people who've received that honor, as I mentioned, many of them came from foreign countries to fight as Americans for our liberty. Still today, our constitutional republic is a beacon of liberty in the world. And that's why so many people continue to come every day seeking a better life for themselves and their families. However, there's a distinction to be made between coming to this country in compliance and supporting our laws and coming here surreptitiously. Let me make an analogy. If I go out and buy a sports car, and it's my car and I take care of it and I've earned it and I keep it in my garage, I'm going to do everything I can to preserve it. I did what I needed to get it lawfully. If the kid down the street comes and steals the car, guess what? He's not going to take care of it. He's going to run it up and down the streets. He's going to drag the bottom off on the curbs. He's not going to take care of it because he's not interested in preserving it for the future. He's interested in using it for that moment to get what he may out of it. There's a distinct attitude that we have to be aware of in our community and our country. We have to be careful that we protect an attitude toward our country and our community of preserving it, of keeping it for future generations. We can't allow any kind of double-mindedness to interfere with the preservation of our community and our way of life. I come from immigrants. Many of you come from immigrants. Our families migrated here looking for a better way of life. In immigrant communities that have followed the law, there's a general sense of patriotism and loyalty to this nation and the ideas that it represents, that simultaneously recognizes our interesting and exotic heritages, but also embraces a domestic future. In communities where unlawfulness is the calling card to living, there is a resolute defiance against assimilation and hard-edged dedication to a place of origin, rather than a mere acknowledging appreciation for the heritage of that place and how it can enrich the American heritage, the American melting pot society. So as we remember those who've fallen in sacrifice to our ability to remain free, to perpetuate the great American experiment, and remain a bastion of freedom in a world of despotism and gritty meanness, let us not lose sight of what they were fighting to maintain: a nation of laws and not of men. A nation subject to the will of the people as enshrined in our Constitution, not subject to the whims of the mob driven by wordsmithing or fear-mongering. Let us remember who we are and why we have been great, so that we do not lose who we can become and what we can achieve. Thank you very much.